Abraham Derrick never believed in coincidences. As a top-tier surgeon, he thrived on control, whether it was handling high-risk surgeries or managing his tightly packed schedule. Every decision he made was calculated, leaving no room for surprises. But tonight, something felt different. After a grueling day in the operating room, instead of heading to a high-end restaurant as usual, Abraham found himself stepping into a small, family-run eatery tucked away on a quiet street. No dazzling lights, no shallow laughter of wealthy colleagues, just the warm scent of toasted bread and simmering spices filling the air. A place where no one knew him, a place where, for once, he could simply exist. He chose a table by the window, ordered a steak and a glass of wine. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself a moment of stillness. He closed his eyes, inhaling deeply, letting the tension in his shoulders ease ever so slightly. Then, through the soft murmur of the restaurant, a sound cut through, fragile, trembling sobs. Abraham's eyes snapped open, his brow furrowing as he scanned the room. In the far corner near the counter, a little girl sat on the floor, her tiny shoulders shaking as she wiped at her face with small fists. She couldn't have been older than 4. Dark curls framed her round face, and even from a distance, he could see the striking blue of her tear-filled eyes. Something in his chest tightened. He wasn't the type to get involved in personal matters, let alone a stranger's child. Yet before he could rationalize his next move, his feet had already carried him forward. He crouched down beside her, his voice lowering, softer than it had been in years. "Are you okay?" The little girl inhaled shakily, her wide eyes lifting to meet his. Her voice was barely a whisper. "I'm lost." A pang of unexpected concern hit him. This wasn't what he had anticipated tonight, but looking into her frightened blue eyes, Abraham knew he couldn't just walk away. Abraham took a slow, steady breath, keeping his voice calm. "What's your name?" The little girl hesitated, wiping her nose on the sleeve of her sweater before whispering, "Taigan." He nodded, offering her a reassuring smile. "That's a beautiful name, Taigan. Do you know where your mom is?" Her small lips quivered before she shook her head. "She told me to wait right here, but then I couldn't find her." Abraham scanned the restaurant again, searching for anyone who looked frantic, desperate for a missing child. But no one seemed to be looking for her. The concern in his chest deepened. "It's okay," he said gently. "I'll help you find her, all right?" For a brief moment, Taigan studied him. Then, without hesitation, she slipped her tiny hand into his. Her warmth caught him off guard. They walked slowly through the restaurant, weaving through tables, as Abraham kept scanning the room. Then a voice cut through the noise, frantic and breathless. "Taigan! Taigan!" Abraham turned sharply. A woman rushed toward them, panic etched into every line of her face. The moment Taigan saw her, she broke free from his grip and ran straight into the woman's arms. "Mommy!" The woman wrapped her arms around the little girl, pressing frantic kisses to her curls. "Oh my God, baby, I was looking everywhere for you." Then she looked up, and the world tilted off its axis. Abraham froze. That face, those eyes. Akina? She went still, her breath catching in her throat. When she spoke, it was barely above a whisper. "Abraham?" Time stretched, holding them both captive in a moment neither had been prepared for. But then his gaze fell to the little girl in her arms. Dark curls, striking blue eyes, a mirror of his own. His hands curled into fists, his chest tightening under the weight of something unbearable. A storm of emotions swirled inside him as the words slipped from his lips, rough and unsteady. "Is she my daughter?" Akina clutched Taigan a little closer, as if shielding her from the storm about to break. She closed her eyes, as if hoping to escape the inevitable. And then, with a voice barely stronger than a breath, she gave him the truth. "Yes." The silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. Abraham couldn't breathe. Akina's words echoed in his head like a cruel, undeniable truth. He had a daughter. 4 years. 4 years she had grown up without him. 4 years of first words, first steps, scraped knees, and bedtime stories. All of it lost, erased from his reach. The realization hit him like a weight pressing against his chest. Had she ever asked about him? Had she ever wondered why he wasn't there? And now, after all this time, did he even have the right to call himself her father? His hands curled into fists at his sides, struggling to keep his emotions in check. He wanted to shout, to demand back the years that had been stolen from him, but all he could do was look at Akina, his gaze sharp, filled with something raw. "Why didn't you tell me?" Akina pressed her lips together, her dark eyes swimming with emotions she could no longer hide. "Because you had your whole life ahead of you, Abraham. You were building a career, saving lives. I didn't want to be the thing that held you back." A dry, humorless laugh escaped him. "Held me back?" He shook his head, exhaling sharply. "You made that decision for me. You took away my right to know her." Akina's gaze dropped to Taigon, who was still blissfully unaware, playing with the hem of her sleeve. Abraham forced himself to push past the anger. Yes, he could be furious. Yes, he could demand answers. But none of that would change the truth. Taigon was here. He knelt down, his piercing blue eyes softening as he spoke. "Taigon, sweetheart." She looked up at him, her small face full of curiosity. "Do you know who I am?" Taigon tilted her head, thinking for a moment before glancing at Akina, as if searching for an answer. Then, she looked back at him. "You're the nice man who helped me." A faint smile touched Abraham's lips, but deep in his chest, something twisted, something equal parts warmth and heartache. He swallowed hard, nodding. "That's right, I am the nice man who helped you, but I'm also something else." Taigon blinked up at him, waiting. "What?" His throat tightened. The words were caught somewhere deep inside him, lodged between the walls he had spent years building. But as he looked into her bright blue eyes, his eyes, he knew he couldn't run from this. "I'm your dad." For a moment, Taigun didn't react. She simply stared at him, her small brows furrowing. Then, slowly, she turned to Akina again, seeking confirmation. Akina inhaled, then gave a single, quiet nod. Taigun looked back at him, and to his utter disbelief, a small, delighted smile tugged at her lips. "Really?" Abraham felt something inside him crack wide open. He nodded, his voice softer now. "Really," and then, the last thing he ever expected happened. Taigun reached out and took his hand. In that single moment as her tiny fingers curled around his, Abraham Derrick, the man who had spent his entire life chasing control, realized something. Some things were far more important than success. And right now, he was holding on to it. Taigun's tiny hand fit perfectly in Abraham's palm, small, delicate, warm. It was such a foreign feeling, one he had never expected to experience. Throughout his career, he had steadied his hands over countless surgical instruments, but he had never held something quite like this. Something so precious. Taigun gave his hand a light squeeze, as if to reassure herself this was real. And in that moment, Abraham knew he would never let her go. Akina stood beside them, her expression guarded. She wasn't pushing him away anymore, but the hesitation in her eyes was clear. Between them lay an invisible wall built from years of lost time, from choices that couldn't be undone. Abraham glanced toward the counter where Taigun had been crying just moments ago. Now she was holding his hand like he had been there all along. "What do you want to do now?" Akina asked, her voice measured, cautious. He met her gaze, unwavering. "I want to be in her life." A beat of silence stretched between them before she nodded. "We have to take it slow, Abraham. She doesn't know anything about you yet." He squeezed Taigun's hand just slightly, grounding himself. "I know, but I'm not going anywhere." That evening, Akina allowed him into their home for dinner. As he stepped inside the small apartment, he felt something unfamiliar, a quiet warmth that had never existed in his own luxurious, sterile penthouse. Taigun twirled in a bright princess dress, her tiara slightly askew. "I'm a warrior princess today," she announced proudly. Abraham chuckled. "Does that mean I get to be a knight?" Tigan tilted her head in thought before flashing a bright smile. "Only if you help me fight dragons," he smirked. "Deal." Dinner was filled with chatter, mostly from Tigan, who excitedly talked about fairy tales, preschool, and how each of her stuffed animals had their own names and personalities. Abraham listened, drinking in every detail, engraving them into his memory like they were the most important things in the world. After dinner, Tigan pulled out a set of crayons and paper. She scribbled with fierce concentration before finally holding up her drawing for him to see. 3 figures: her mother, and a tall man, all holding hands. Abraham's chest tightened. Tigan looked up at him, her blue eyes shining with anticipation. "Do you like it?" He swallowed hard, forcing down the lump in his throat, then smiled. "I love it, sweetheart." And for the first time in his life, Abraham Derrick knew exactly where he belonged. The evening passed with an unexpected ease, but as the night deepened, Akina finally spoke. "Tigan, sweetheart, it's bedtime." Tigan let out an exaggerated sigh, clutching her box of crayons as if it were the most precious treasure in the world. "But I haven't finished coloring the sky yet." Akina arched a brow. "Do you want to wake up as a grumpy dragon tomorrow?" Tigan considered this for a moment before reluctantly nodding. She stood up slowly, dragging her feet toward the hallway, but then she turned back to Abraham, her bright blue eyes filled with quiet hope. "Are you going to be here tomorrow?" Abraham hesitated for just a second, glancing at Akina. He wasn't sure if he was moving too fast, but then he saw it, the smallest, almost imperceptible nod from her. He looked back at Tigan and smiled. "I'll be here." A wide grin spread across her face before she suddenly ran forward, wrapping her tiny arms around his waist. Abraham went completely still. For a moment, the world seemed to pause. Then, slowly, he lowered himself, carefully wrapping his arms around her in return. He had never imagined a simple hug could make his entire chest tighten like this. When Tigan finally let go and ran toward her room, Abraham remained standing there, something deep inside him shifting into place. Akina leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. "She's already attached to you," she said softly. "You can't disappear." Abraham turned to her, his voice steady, unwavering. "I'm not going anywhere." A moment of silence stretched between them before she nodded, a quiet acceptance in her eyes. She turned toward the hallway, but hesitated just before walking away. "Good night, Abraham." It was the first time she had said his name without hesitation. Abraham exhaled, leaning back against the chair. For so long, he had believed success was the only thing that mattered. But now, as the distant sound of Tigan's laughter echoed from the small bedroom, he realized he had found something far more important. And this time, he wasn't going to lose it. 2 days later, Abraham stood outside Akina's apartment, his hands clenching slightly at his sides. He had been invited this time, but somehow that didn't make it any less nerve-wracking. He wasn't the type to get nervous, but tonight felt different. The door opened and Akina stood there, her dark eyes flickered over him. Not guarded, not cold, but still cautious. She didn't say anything at first, just stepped aside to let him in. The apartment was just as he remembered, small, cozy, filled with the little signs of a life well lived. Bookshelves packed with children's stories, crayon drawings taped to the walls, little pieces of a family he had been missing. "She's in her room," Akina said, closing the door behind him. "She's been talking about you all morning." Something warm spread in his chest. Before he could respond, small, hurried footsteps echoed down the hall. A second later, Tigan appeared, wearing a bright yellow princess dress and a slightly crooked plastic tiara. She stopped when she saw him, her blue eyes lighting up. "You came." Without hesitation, she ran straight toward him, wrapping her tiny arms around his leg like it was the most natural thing in the world. Abraham smiled, crouching down to hug her. "I promised, didn't I?" Tigan grinned, stepping back to spin in a slow twirl, her dress flaring out around her. "I'm a princess today, but not the kind that waits for a prince, the kind that fights dragons." Abraham chuckled. That's the best kind. Tygan reached for his hand, excitement shining in her eyes. Can you help me make dinner? Mommy says you can stir the sauce. Abraham glanced over at Akina, who stood with her arms crossed, but something lighter in her expression. He nodded. I think I can handle that. And as he followed Tygan into the kitchen, listening to her laughter, catching the small smile on Akina's lips, he realized something. For the first time in his life, he wasn't chasing anything. He had already found exactly where he was meant to be. Abraham stood in the kitchen, stirring the simmering sauce while Tigran carefully sprinkled in the seasonings like a true little chef. Careful, sweetheart, Akina called from the side, though there was a small smile on her lips as she watched them together. Tygan turned to Abraham, her blue eyes wide with curiosity. Daddy, do you know how to cook? Abraham chuckled, glancing at the sauce before admitting, Not really, but I think I have a pretty great teacher. Tygan beamed, giving his arm an encouraging pat. Then I'll teach you. At that moment, something settled inside him, an understanding that he had missed so much. But now, he wasn't going to miss another moment. After dinner, Tygan pulled Abraham toward the coffee table, where she had already set up crayons and paper. Draw with me, Daddy. Abraham sat beside her, picking up a crayon. What should I draw? Tygan tilted her head thoughtfully before grinning. Draw us. He smiled and started sketching simple figures, a tall man, a beautiful woman, and a small girl in the middle, all holding hands. When he finished, Tygan stared at the drawing for a long moment, then looked up at him, eyes shining. Daddy, can I keep this? His throat tightened. Of course, sweetheart. Tygan carefully hugged the picture to her chest, as if it were the most precious treasure in the world. From across the room, Akina, who had been watching quietly, finally spoke. Tygan, sweetheart, it's bedtime. Tygan sighed dramatically, but this time, she didn't argue. Before she left, she turned back and wrapped her small arms tightly around Abraham. I love you, Daddy. 3 simple words, yet they shattered every wall inside him. He had spent years making life or death decisions in the operating room, but nothing had ever felt as monumental as this. Nothing had ever made his heart ache and swell at the same time the way those words did. He bent down, pressing a soft kiss to her curls. I love you too, Tygan. As the bedroom door closed, Abraham remained standing there, his heart full in a way it had never been before. Akina met his gaze, her expression softer than it had ever been. You're doing great, Abraham. And for the first time in his life, he truly believed it. 3 months later, Abraham knelt in the small garden behind Akina's apartment, his hands clutching a dark blue velvet box. In front of him, Akina stood frozen, her brown eyes wide with shock. What are you doing? She whispered. Abraham took a deep breath, holding her gaze with the same unwavering determination she had always known. But this time, it wasn't for a difficult surgery or a high-stakes decision. This time, it was for her. I lost you once, Akina, and I know I don't deserve another chance so easily. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that family isn't about being perfect. It's about choosing each other every single day. And I want to choose you. Forever. He opened the box, revealing a simple yet elegant platinum ring that shimmered under the warm evening light. Let me do this right. I love you, I love Tygan, and I want to spend the rest of my life protecting both of you. Akina covered her mouth with her hands, silent tears streaming down her cheeks. Tygan, who had been watching nearby, squealed in excitement. Say yes, Mommy, we'll be a real family. Akina let out a soft laugh through her tears before finally nodding. Yes, Abraham, I'll marry you. He stood up, pulling her into his arms, holding her as if he would never let go. 1 year later, under a canopy of white blossoms, Akina walked down the aisle, her hand tightly holding Tygan's. Tygan, dressed in a delicate little dress, whispered excitedly, Mommy, you look so pretty. Akina squeezed her daughter's hand, then lifted her gaze to meet Abraham's, her future waiting at the end of the aisle. When their vows were exchanged, when Abraham kissed her under the watchful eyes of their loved ones, Akina knew she had finally found where she truly belonged. 2 years later, their home wasn't just filled with warmth and laughter. It was filled with love, with memories being made every single day, the kind of home he never knew he needed, but now couldn't imagine living without. Tygon ran through the yard, her tiny hands clutching the string of a dragon-shaped kite that Abraham had made for her. Akina stood on the porch, her hands resting gently on her stomach, where a new life was growing. Abraham stepped up behind her, wrapping his arms around her, pressing a soft kiss to her hair. "I love you," he whispered. Akina smiled, leaning into him. They had come so far, from loss and uncertainty to something unbreakable, a family, a love that would never fade.